And we were talking about the tone policing, and then also from my point of things, yeah, tone policing. And when I had to learn that one, even I was like, oh, I was taught I had, as a woman, I have to speak quietly and softly to be heard. So I was tone policing. It's like, oh, you're saying that, but say it in the way I want to hear it. And it was like, oh no, wait a minute. I have to listen to what's being said. Like, what's the words? What's actually being said? And it's not your, like, it's not a person's job to, it's so many layers of dis, like, for even to hear you saying like, I've got to listen to all of that. Thanks for sharing how you have to understand my daily, oh, it's uncomfortable for you to hear about. Well, that was a person in my community. Like, I don't get to choose to hear it or not. So that when a Caucasian that, oh, it's so painful to learn about how hard it is out there, like it's like, yeah, it is. They love vie, right? um, so one call I put out a lot is like, it's not up to those that have been stepped on to teach you how it hurts them that you're stepping on them. It's up to you to figure out where you're putting your feet. Like, it's, yeah. Anyway, well, gentlemen.
No,
Amber,
I think that, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
there you go. Sorry.
No, I just think that, I mean, it's what a gift that you're giving to take the time to listen to someone else, and then to meet them where they are, and then kind of guide them through, another perspective or another way of seeing things. And I think that's a challenge because it can really drain you if
Mhm.
it's on you to do that. But I think that it's beautiful that you recognize the potential that they may not get it during your conversation, but they may wake up another day and have that epiphany and be like, wow, and
Mhm.
really get it. And that to me makes that kind of patience and understanding worthwhile. But I also understand the angry warrior too, the person that says, it's not my job to make this person feel comfortable. It's not my job to educate them on this, that, and the other. They need to learn it. They need to put some work into it. And that you see that with the tone police. I can't hear what you're saying unless you say it the way I think you should say it. And when both of you were talking, it also made me think of cancel culture as well, and how that sometimes plays out in our efforts to address issues of race and other issues. But I wanted I think that we just have to decide know what role we're we have to decide what role we want to play and recognize the one that we are in these situations. But I was thinking about allies as you were talking about the angry warrior, that example, and it made me. And I think I've shared this before with David and Angela. I'm not sure. But I always think of it as like you're trying to reach a certain destination, whether it's your seat at the table. And in order to get there, you're going to need support to make it happen. And sometimes it's going to be from someone who can read a map. They can help read the map. They can take you on the journey. Some folks are going to put gas in your car. Someone might have to drive you there. And it's just um, seeing people where they are and recognizing what they can give and contribute to the situation and what they can't. I mean, if they don't know how to drive, you don't get upset and angry with them. That's just not something that they can do on this particular road trip, you know. And I think that making a space where people can make mistakes and still be an ally or still be uh, a vessel for change is important. So, yeah, I loved hearing you speak about that. I just think that it's so important, and folks that do that don't often get the recognition or support that they deserve because that's work. It's some serious work. That's all I wanted to say.
Amber, before we move forward, can you share about the issue of violence against Native American or sorry, Indigenous or First Nation women in Canada? Because Um, Something that comes to mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, it almost sounds like there's this idea from colonial times, or I don't know where, that people are disposable. So has that ever come up, that just like there had to be a movement to say that Black Lives Matter because they don't matter to a lot of people? Is that what is happening? That people are used and abused, and there's nobody to look into it, and it saddens me because we always want to flee to Canada as like a refuge of progressive politics and equality, and then you tell me that they're still doing all these horrible things, and I guess they pretend to be more European, or even the Europeans are screwing up. So tell us about um, like when you do studies of domestic violence, sexual assault, they talk about like the causes and like the culture around it. But what what has been like the latest like overall picture of why are these things happening so much?
Well, that's actually an interesting topic because I actually in Canada advocate often just to wake Canadians up to themselves. Like, you should see how many people on Facebook will post a lot of Black Lives Matter stuff, which is awesome, but turned a completely blind eye to stuff that's happening in Canada. And so, like, literally simultaneously with the George Floyd incident, we had 3 First Nations shot by police officer in Winnipeg, Manitoba in April, and you couldn't find anything. You couldn't find posts about it. It was like completely buried. And so Canadians like to pretend that they are like very not racist, and those south of the border, those racists belong down there. That's a very big thing. I would say that we're behind where the Black Lives Movement is. We haven't even gotten a hello. Like, never mind, you know. So when we closed down Canada, for instance, the Wet'suwet'en, that was, you know, very racially, like, there was, you should have seen the stuff that was being said, like, you know, they should just run us over, like all kinds of things. And we're literally trying to save headwaters, which would feed all the way down into Washington and Oregon. So it's not like we're just being selfish in our fight. But as far as the murdered and missing women, where I'm from is the territory called the Highway of Tears. It's notorious. There's something like 1,900 missing women and girls in that territory just in the last 30 years. So that's like people from my nation and neighboring nations. It really does come down to the fact that nobody's caring and nobody's looking for them. So I get asked a lot what I think it is, and I think, and this is systemic across Canada, it's actually systemic in your country as well, where there's just an abundance of murdered and missing women and girls who are Indigenous. And they are murdered and just completely missing, to the degree that it's 10 to 12 times more likely a First Nations under 35 will meet a fate of like rape or killing or go missing than a Caucasian. And that's kind of crazy considering that we're less than 5% of the population. Like, how can less than 5% of the population have a 10 times more likelihood per capita? Like, that's wild. And it's been going on for decades. So, you know, there's certainly going to be a man camps are going to be an issue where, you know, industry man camps, definitely, because these men just fly all over the place and they're in one area for a couple weeks, they're in the next. And there's an opportunity there. If you know, that when somebody of a First Nations goes missing and the police literally just go, yeah, okay, another one, and just put the file away, then who's your likely target? And then, you know, we even had like in Canada, Justin Trudeau's very first term, we had a murdered and missing inquiry, and there was a lot of money spent, a lot of time, where they literally went and asked a lot of questions to different First Nations, and, you know, it's just collecting dust now. So they opened up all the wounds all over again, had people share their stories, and they came down and said Canada is racist against their First Nations people. The UN has actually said this as well because of the Site C dam in northern British Columbia, as well as the the Wet'suwet'en pipeline. So the UN has actually said also Canada is racist against the First Nations people, and have actually ordered both of those to be like halted, but Canada is continuing to go forward with those projects. And so it's not even really being acknowledged. It's being given like Justin Trudeau's happy smile, like he's doing something, but nothing is actually happening. We have currently across the country, we have I'm going to say it completely wrong, the Sepwemik, who are land claiming down in northern BC. We have the lobster fishermen over on the East Coast who are currently fighting. We have the Six Nations in Ontario who are fighting for their land. We have the Mohawk and we have the Wet'suwet'en. Currently, these are like 7 nations that are currently fighting with the government in Canada over treaty rights that were in some incidences in place 250 years. The Wet'suwet'en have a Supreme Court of Canada like ruling. Like the highest court in Canada has ruled that we have the sovereignty over that land, but it's not enacted in law. So we're continuously fighting this, and no Canadian is saying like, what? There's a Supreme Court ruling, it should be in law, but it's like everybody's still systemically racist about it, and we should just accept this as our fate. As a 44-year-old woman, mine's only 4 times as likely now of meeting that kind of fate. So as you get older, you kind of age out of the MMIWG, but it's a big problem. And we just act like it's not a problem at all. And it's funny because, by the way, when I go to Central and South America, I didn't realize it until my second visit, but I feel super comfortable there. And I realized that it's because I don't experience racism there. I blend better.
Well, that's the issue of being a minority. The native population of Mexico, like I don't know if that's a correct term or is even a racist term, like full-blooded native population versus the mestizo and the Spaniards or the criollos. They're a minority in the sense of like they're invisible and not fully embraced by the rest of the population, and they're experiencing the same type of violence in Ciudad Juarez. And it's similar, like most likely it's even the police who's doing it. And I listened to a podcast where they try to find all the culprits, and it turns out it was everybody. And that's what's so disturbing, that like it happens on the other side of the border, but it happens here too with human trafficking and with and when people are not organized or don't have a voice or they're dismissed because the population is small, then it's easier for people to get away with it. The one thing that this country is contending with is that the population is changing and that the numbers are growing. And I feel that there's a push to try to like suppress those communities. But a lot of my friends say that that's not true and that I'm just making stuff up. So you were talking about warriors, or, I don't know if this is a social justice warrior situation, but I want to, since you guys are so diplomatic and so lovely, I want to put it before you and see how you would react, because I lost it when I heard this. So 2 days ago, we're recording this around the time where we're trying to figure out who's the real president of the U.S. It's going to play later, but bear with us. So a friend of mine, who I thought he was a saint, he's like the nicest guy, very progressive. I'm sure it has to do with the information that he gets, but he said the following. He said, if the Republicans win, I see the Democrats rioting in the streets. If the Democrats win, I don't think the Republicans will do anything at all. And, in the surface, there's nothing weird about that statement. It's just one party is violent and the other one is not. Okay, so let's just leave it at that. But I can read between the lines, and I have a media literacy background, so I know what he means. But this is a very cool guy, and he says he has friends from all kinds of backgrounds and stuff like that. But I just lost it, and I attacked by saying that's like the most racist thing I ever heard. And he's like, I didn't mention race. I mentioned the blues and the reds, and I was like, that for the last 30 years, they've been saying that the Democrats are the party of the minorities. And what do people usually say about minorities? That they're violent, that they're savages, that they are people who criminals. So for you to say that the party that has the most minorities is gonna create havoc and is gonna put everybody at risk, and then the other guys are just gonna be like, okay, whatever, is not only a lie, but it's like the worst lie that can be pushed in a race baiting way, because there's an FBI report that the greatest danger to American safety are white supremacist groups. And most white supremacist groups are supporters of that other party. Is that me being crazy and just hypersensitive and assuming that people are evil, or is that the kind of dog whistle that it goes back to like people that look white or think white or are around a lot of white people? You can say something like that and everybody like, oh yeah. And I remember when there was the protest and there was some looting and stuff like that. I was wondering, why is this happening? But then people would come to me and say, hey man, things are getting out of hand. Like, I'm cool with supporting causes and stuff like that, but when they start breaking things, like, I'm out. And, why is it turning that way? And so now there's this idea that everybody who has an issue or unhappy with what's going on, they're going to turn into violence. So then it's easier to smash them because they're violent people. So I don't know what comes to mind when you hear something like that. And is that a dog whistle, or am I just crazy?
Well, first of all, it's like serious gaslighting. So I've heard this many times, and in Canada, we don't have a two-party system, so it's not as clear, the lines, but we definitely have them still. And I've heard this so often with the riots of the BLM and stuff, and it's like, first, the Democrats, if we're going to make it about a party, they maybe are it's the, what am I trying to say? Okay, the Republicans, it's like white privilege at its finest, that statement. It's like they don't have to make a stink. That's the point. The Democrats or the people who support the Democratic Party have to make a stink because the Republicans are suppressing everybody else who's trying to vote for the Democrats, unless they're, there's some people who are assimilating with the Republicans. But like the statement in of itself almost proves the fact that there is a racist intent. Like, you're saying that because, yeah, they're going to uprise because you have a racist president, a president who has basically created a race war in the United States. So, I mean, and again, I'm coming from Canada, so like I'm just watching, and to me, you guys have a race civil war happening and everybody's just turning a blind eye to it. So of course you're going to rise up against that. And if that, in any rise up or revolution often has some kind of like, building that gets burned or something. Like, that's just what happens. But yeah, so no, I don't think you were overreacting at all. I think it's just white privilege at its finest, that statement.
I could see how, if I heard that, I could understand your reading his comment in that way. And I feel like I understand it because I understand clearly that my skin communicates things that I have no control over to, other folks in general, but particularly to white American. And then Black Americans have been criminalized so much in this country. Even when we talk about, even throughout, before the election, whenever people raise, or just politicians typically, when they talk about issues that are of importance, they don't really get beyond criminal justice reform, jails and things, and poverty, joblessness, things like that. There's a wide variety of concerns that never get addressed, but I don't want to go too far into that. I just think that your comment made me think of Tom Brokaw. I don't know do you all know who that is? He's a fairly well-known journalist. that's retired years ago. They brought him back on one of the news segments about the election, and he said that African Americans were protesting and it's their right, but then they start looting and burning things down, and that he has a problem with that. That's more or less what he said, and it was just such a shock to be thrown into this pile of people that have decided to do that, because I don't think that's. I think people are seeing they're seeing what they've been told as truth, rather than taking the time to actually look and observe and try and understand the experiences of Black folks in this country. So that's a long way of saying I could understand you being upset about that. But when you raised the question, I just wondered why your friend felt it was okay to say that to you, and what does that say?
Well,
Does that say anything to you?
he was saying it to the air, like, "Hey guys, look what's gonna happen." And they've said stuff before, like the Democrats are all about taking care of people and like bribing them or giving them stuff, and the Republicans are about hard work and get it yourself and don't depend on anybody. So it's like it's propaganda, and you can't blame people for you hear propaganda so much, and if you don't think critically, you start believing it. That's fine, but when you start talking about safety, those are the things that bother me, because in Guatemala, when the U.S. was supporting the dictator, whatever over there, all he had to say is the native population are a bunch of communists, and the communists are godless and gonna tear down our country and turn it into another dictatorship or whatever. So then they gave the military the mandate to go ahead and murder everyone because they had this Red Scare in Guatemala. And I've met survivors who came to America as refugees coming out of that. And what's interesting is the U.S. was supporting, on one hand, the massacre, and on the other hand, they were letting people flee the massacre. So they were like on both sides of the issue. And now you hear that stuff coming out from the current president, that people are enemies of the state, or that he's going to throw people in jail for 10 years for tearing down a statue. And like there's all this like draconian stuff going on. But going back to the issue of like you said, lumping people in a group of violent rebel rousers, or are the hardest thing about protesters in the U.S. is that it's like it's the best place to protest and is the worst place to protest, because America's so powerful that all they have to do is say, that guy looked at me the wrong way, or I could see terroristic intent in what he was doing, and that's it. Like you're done. So I see that everybody's putting their lives on the line when they speak out, and like people would say about places like Palestine and other places, like who would put themselves in that position? Only a person who's truly oppressed. If you were doing okay, you would never go out during COVID and try to pick fights. Like why? Why would you do that? You have to be insane. But they turn around like they are insane. They've always been insane. And that's why we have to have like more rules and more ways to keep them at bay. So I know it's a very complicated issue, and we can talk about it all night, but
Can I add one thing?
Sure. Yeah.
No, I think going back to Amber's point, that's always going to be a part in some form or fashion of any kind of protest, that where people are literally out. I mean, if you're out in the streets screaming, "Please don't shoot me, stop killing people in my community," and no one's listening, people are going to become more and more desperate. And some may take the route of, looting or take advantage of the situation. I mean, I think that people have the capacity to separate the purpose of a march or protest from folks that are there to try and take advantage of it or use it as a shield to do things. That they get that, they understand that. What I wish people would focus more on is that people and their suffering is more important than the things that they seem to cherish so much. And I feel that way. I learned that lesson after Katrina when I lived in New Orleans. You know, people were left to die. You know, when they brought in the National Guard around the Superdome, you know, these folks had guns drawn on American citizens, but they had food, they had water, they got them in. But the folks who were desperate in need of support, you know, they were just dehumanized, and they weren't. And that made it easy to. It was almost as if, how dare you be poor and not be able to get out of the city? You know, it's a lot more to it than just saying, you know, these people are going to riot, loot. We got to stop acting like these things are more important than the suffering of people.
Well, I know we've gone long, but if you guys have another 10, 15 minutes, I want to bring up the one topic I wanted to discuss.
Okay.
I get in trouble a lot for being too critical of my so-called community. So is there room for that? Because the one thing that I think we can fall into is either romanticizing a group or demonizing a group. So it's like, you know, in our circle it would be white people. So when people start like, well, white people do this and white people do that, or all white people have privilege, something like that, I started thinking like, well, if you are a poor farmer during colonial times, that was one situation. Now, if you were a plantation, you know, master, that's something else. Well, what if you were someone that just came in from wherever, this Soviet bloc in the last 30 years? You have a foot in the door because of the way that you look, but you still have some of the issues of being an immigrant, where the language, things like that. So this idea that we could categorize everyone from one group as oppressors or as supremacists or as this or that, it starts getting very complicated because there's different generations, there's a caste system among white people when it comes down to class and things like that, or education, and what the evil people that we all have problems with, and as kind, as loving as we can be, there's our evil people out there. What they try to do is they try to pin everybody against each other. So it's easy for the progressive movement to be dismissed as anti-white or anti-European or Western or something like that. But if you're able to acknowledge that we were all born into this, and it's what you make out of it. So I've always been a big proponent of like the allies are like people who have maybe a voice or a place on the table, and they can use that as a springboard for the other communities that don't have that opportunity. So, but is it reasonable to be worried that some of our communities can be romanticized as almost like sinless? Like, because I'm the first one to say, like, there are people who are trying to make us look bad, or who do things that are problematic, and then it builds up to the stereotype, or it creates more havoc. So how do we challenge our own ethnic group, whatever we're from, to be their best without sounding as like, oh, we're telling them to become more tame or more assimilated, or to give in to the system, when there are certain things that are problematic no matter who does them, and there are jerks in every community. So I feel that if you ever come out as critical of something, then they call you a sellout, or they call you an appeaser. Do you guys think about that, or is that something that that it is kind of created within ourselves? Maybe it's our own insecurity, like we can't be our full selves because we're afraid that we're going to be misjudged. Has that ever come up in your conversation?
I'll jump in just because I don't want to forget. because what you were asking brought up a few things. One thing I was thinking about is that appreciation of, regardless of where you're at. I was talking about this with a friend the other day. I remember being in high school and being a little punk, and I was in a school that was an art school, and there were jocks, and then the art kids didn't understand that the jocks could feel pain because they were so privileged. And what I saw was just a whole bunch of kids everybody was trying to just, there's pain regardless of where they were. It's just a different style, a different type. So that understanding, like what you were saying, like every person within their intersectional space has something to be working through. So that's just like an empathy of human. If we're bringing the kindest parts out, then there's that fighting a cross. And for me, I have a hard time within the communities, like the feminist community, there's quite a lot of cross fighting. And I find that energy to be, for me, it sounds like I'm doing what I'm about to say I don't think is helpful, but I guess I am, and that's where there's like, oh, it's so layered. But why are we fighting each other when there's something much bigger than all of us that if we work together, those little differences, race, gender, there's a patriarchal system that's based on money that's taking away joy from everything underneath it. So how to work together, as opposed to like if you judge another, it's usually something in yourself you're upset about. So I'm saying that right now. What I'm showing right now is that awkwardness. So something new is being learned, and I'm seeing both sides inside me and inside others. So that's a really good question that you've just asked, because what it brought up for me was ideas of ignorance, of just not like trying to act before we fully understand what we're hearing. Like there's like so much cultural trauma, so much like racial trauma intermingled, heritage trauma, that everybody's reacting in a different way, and then we're judging how we're reacting as opposed to just, okay, like what is happening? What are you feeling? What are you feeling? What are you feeling before action's made? So I just got myself in a little circle. Your question was great. That's me messy over here. So I'm done.
Okay,
Yeah.
good points. Amber?
Well, I think we keep coming back to this idea of assimilation. I love what you're asking, and I've certainly struggled with a similar conversation with myself about, and even in the last 6 months, I'd say like I'm just thinking more and more about this idea of assimilation. And I remember, like, for instance, my grandparents would tell their kids or their grandchildren that we had to like always dress very well to go into town, hair perfect in braids, dressed perfectly in order to just be seen as like non-savage, not to get the same kind of respect, but just to like not be seen as savages. And, we've definitely, I think, obviously made headway in that. I don't have to do that same extreme nowadays, but I'm challenging myself in my own thoughts around what are like these judgments. Are they judgments for the betterment of our healing process, or are they judgments because it's what we've been, taught since birth? So, like, for instance, dress codes, when you talk about, say, like the Black community of Los Angeles and the dress that they tend to wear, the urban outfit. There's nothing wrong with that, but we expect that everybody wears a certain thing to a job interview. So like as a business owner, I'm even trying to sit with that myself. Like if it's well put together and it's their uniform, then what does it matter? And I'm a former street kid, so I kind of resonate with that, which probably makes it easier for me to accept that kind of thing in a hair salon. But this is what I think as society we need to start to break down as well. Like, are we asking cultural, differences to assimilate to one look, or are we asking them to better themselves? And I think that's the question we have to be asking when we are coming back to our own communities. And obviously, when we talk about statistics or stereotyping, those exist for a reason, you know, like when people say like, well, the crimes are being committed, not always. We know that, like, statistically, the crimes aren't always being committed, or like kids are in foster care because their parents can't take care of them. But then we know that as we peel those layers, there's reasons and traumas behind it. So I think in asking a community to, or saying you need to do better, we also have to realize that they can't just do better without the healing happening first, you know? Like, it's sort of like putting the cart before the horse, so to speak. So I think in the Latin community, the Black community, the First Nations communities, like, we really need to work heavy on healing them as well to get to that place where a certain amount of them can like rise up. And, you know, you also brought up something that I find very interesting, which is different types of privilege. You know, there's like gender privileges, there's class privileges, there's race privileges. Because something like, I'm a former street kid, so there was a lot of like different races, but there was also white kids. But a lot of those white kids typically were poor. And, you know, and reflecting on that, I actually think it's sometimes harder to be a poor white kid. You know, they got bullied a lot more. We just kind of get it every day to a certain degree, but like I found like my white friends who were super poor, they just got like beat up more and like put in the garbage cans and stuff like that. So I think there's like, I don't know, it's debatable whether class or race puts you near the bottom or not, but, and that's just like judgments, I think, of white people on their own to not be poor.
Yes,
So I want to make sure that I understand the question. Are you asking, are we reluctant to critique our own communities out of fear of being pushed out of the community? I'm trying to make sure I understand what you're asking, David.
Yeah, and I don't know if any of you guys have experienced this about marrying outside of your community, because I had a friend, and this is, you know, Angela was talking about mixed race or mixed backgrounds. I had a friend that he was a bunch of different mixtures, but he came out dark skinned, and then his wife was a bunch of different mixtures, and she came out light skinned, and his fellow African Americans were telling him that, like, there was this kind of like hazing, like, oh, we can see that you went outside of a community, and I hear that in the Latino community as well. But there are other components. So there's the thing about, when do you lose your status or your place? You mentioned that in Canada there was some of that where you actually could choose to opt out. But when you become, I don't know if you guys are familiar with, I think it was Bill Cosby and Obama were very stereotypically critical of certain members of their community, and since then they lost a lot of credibility, because they were like doing cheap shots at kids or at people that even other groups criticize. So sometimes it feels like people have to do that to get accepted among whites. They have to come against their own people. So then they're like, oh, you know, he understands us.
You mean respectability politics? I think that
Is that what
the
it's called?
term. I
It's
think
like
so.
lateral violence, no?
Well, self-hating or whatever. But is it always self-hating in that, or is it sometimes it's actually appropriate as you're trying to help people be their best and break out of the stereotypes and break out of the hateful representations that they have of us?
It's a big question. I mean, I'm thinking lots of things. I don't know. I think I would simply say it's of course, it's okay to critique members of the community you identify with, if your intent is to build them up and make them better. But I also think that it's important to recognize that, there's always this outside gaze on your community that you're aware of. So when Amber's mom told her, well, maybe you need to dress a certain way, the things you hear that, but you may do certain things to push your group towards assimilation because it's going to help with your survival. Where I'm going with this is I think that there are different conversations. People have to recognize that there are different conversations. I might be upset with Black people who use the word nigger, but that conversation within my community is very different from someone outside of the community critiquing the use of that word. I'm not sure if this is really clear, but it's just the conversation that comes from within. I don't think of it as if it's intended to nurture and build up. I like believing that it's going to be received that way, but I also recognize that there are certain I'm not really sure how to say it. I think that you just have to recognize that there are different conversations. When I grew up as a kid, I was told you always have to have a receipt. Don't ever go to a store and leave without a receipt. Or, there were certain ways you had to carry yourself or present yourself, and that was really focused on you surviving. And so I think there was a time when that critique was just, it was understood that's just something that you did. And you also were aware that there was this ongoing gaze from outside of your community that had already prejudged or predetermined who you were or how you were or what your worth was, that you couldn't give them evidence that they were right, And so I don't know how far, I'm not sure how close that is to your question, but I do think that I'm fine with the critique and being critiqued because I feel like it's important to know how others view us and the things that they may project onto us and how it's going to affect the quality of our lives. And I think that, and folks outside of my generation may not feel the same way, but does that answer your question?
Yes, and it goes back to our original premise of how do we define ourselves and building that power. In one of our conversations, you mentioned that the Black Power sign means that we want to share the power, or that your community would like to have some of the power that is been like hogged, or like they won't let it go. So I think to empower different communities, we have to create opportunities for them to be empowered. So I'm looking forward that now we have more representatives from different groups in the U.S. Congress and Senate, and a lot of it is a backlash from all the normalizing of racism. It actually made people fight back by running for office. So that is a hopeful thing, but I think it is going to be very difficult transition to a more equitable and more representational world. And to finish off, is there such a thing as First Nation representatives in the Canadian government?
Yeah, there was actually a big controversy. We had a woman who was actually she was actually the Attorney General. Is that right, Angela? The Attorney General. And then there was a big scandal where she wouldn't do something the Prime Minister wanted her to do. And so he fired her from that position. And she recently just ran again as an independent and won her seat. So that was kind of a big deal because she was an independent. But it's not common.
few and far between.
Very much so.
Like, what is it? Like, there's again a lot of talk about the words, but no actual action in Canada. It's like, oh no, but we're so good. Look, we're acknowledging land. It's like, but you're still living on it. So that's why when we did our intros, I was a bit like, I don't. There's still that to hold space for how to. Okay, I'm not making sense, but never mind. I'll get back to it.
Well, we'll end on that note. I have a comment after this. Jerald, did you have something to share?
No, just that I was telling Angela that what she said made sense. You stopped abruptly.
Thank you. Yeah, okay, I got it back. Thank you. It's that words of action. So in a lot of organizations here, there's a respect and a place carved out for Indigenous, usually a voice or a person, a representative, but a lot of times it's like, oh look, we have that.
They call that tokenism.
Yes. So I see so much, even amongst my peers. So when you were talking about cross criticizing, I don't think I answered that correctly, but I think it's so important in the white community specifically. Criticism needs to be made if it's with the intention of understanding more fully. I spend a lot of time now catching almost everything that some people are saying, where it's just like, do you realize how racist? Do you realize how? Do you see that? I know I'm learning. Tell me when I'm doing it, because change can't be made unless you're calling out. You can say what parts are great, but also, hey, these parts still need to be worked on. So within the Canadian culture, there's a whole lot of aren't we lovely, and not a lot of actually acting lovely. Like I don't know if you, I see you nodding, so yeah, there's a lot of, oh, this is happening. Like a lot of talk about the missing Indigenous women, but a lot of studies done, and then just, that's it. It's still happening.
Even along the lines of systemic racism, our prime minister was like, yeah, I think we have systemic racism. And it went to the House of Commons, our one BIPOC member, leader of a party, he addresses it. One man, one white, very white French man said no. Our leader, the leader of this political party, then called him racist and gets kicked out. Get kicked out of the House of Commons. The only BIPOC leader gets kicked out of the House of Commons for calling somebody racist when he should be at the table, since the table was conversating about systemic racism. And then that particular MP said, I don't believe systemic racism exists. We need to look into that. We need an inquiry first before we can go ahead with a movement about whether or not. We need to decide first. So like, Canada in so many ways is worse off than the United States, in my opinion, because we have that blanket of niceness. The world even goes, oh, Canada, you're so nice. And so we just hide underneath it and go, those Americans in the United States are so racist. We're so beautiful and happy and friendly up here in the Canada. And it couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah. Well, still actively colonizing.
Yeah. I'm going to end with a controversial question and a modified quote from Martin Luther King. So, for the three of you.
You mean the other questions weren't controversial?
Do you prefer someone who's racist to your face, or someone who is polite and pleasant and then they're racist behind closed doors?
100% to my face.
Yeah, to my face.
It's a much safer racism to experience, because when somebody's racist to your face, you know to just like stay away from them. I'm half white, so I recently just had like a huge issue with some of my family members realizing that they have some very strong racist beliefs, and so they believe I'm white racist. So, we can't really get along anymore. But that was way harder for me to deal with because I didn't know it existed, and it just suddenly surprised me like one of those Jack in the Box toys from back in the day, So the overt racist, like, if you are openly racist, I know to just keep some space from you. That's very safe for me. I would much prefer that.
How about you, Gerald?
I mean, I prefer to see it, hear it up front. But I got to tell you, looking back pre-Trump, it was I actually enjoyed not experiencing so much in-your-face racism. So
That's where,
that's the
that's where I was going
backdrop
with the
of
question.
an answer. But I would rather deal with it up front than be surprised by it later, for sure, definitely.
Angela, I know what you're going to say. We can't have the healing start unless we see it in front of us, right?
You so know, because I was also just gonna say fuck, I swear so much. Yes to my face. If you're hiding it, there's no truth. It's not as it is. This isn't even real. It's not, if you're racist, say it. But then there's Gerald, it's when you're healing from trauma, you can't, you have to, to have it, it's gonna hurt. It's not a nice thing. So to have it continually, so remembering to take that care, like what you said. I'm tired and I get
I,
moody when I'm tired.
I kind of feel like, though, also that, in some ways it really doesn't matter because I know I'm gonna react not in the same way, but I know that whether they're racist or not, it's not gonna impact on the way that I present myself so I
What
don't
it
know.
does do,
But in our
what it,
nonviolent communication program, go ahead.
well, what I was going to say is what it does do, though, is it changes the support in the room. So when you have an overt racist in the room, like, say, for instance, you're in a room with a full-on KKK member, and you stand up for yourself, almost everybody in the room who is not overtly racist, that just is systemically racist, will 100% come to you, to your defense. But the covert racist that you experience in the daily, at least this is my experience, that's the one that you end up getting gaslighted about. So, if somebody is giving you microaggressions and then you stand up for yourself, I find that most of the time, then I'm the one who's being told to settle down. I took it the wrong way. You misunderstood. That's not what they meant. So then I end up being told that my experience wasn't right and that I was wrong in my feelings of oppression. So, that's another reason that I think that overt racism is much easier to manage.
We'll have a whole conversation about microaggressions in our next conversation, but to the jobless,
More of this?
what? Sure.
So we're having more of this?
I know it's traumatic, but I want to publicly invite the jobless leader of the Not Very Polite Movement of America, who has been spewing a lot of dog whistle insults and racial conversation, to join us in our circle of love now that he doesn't have anything going on. He can come and we can give him nonviolent communication techniques on how to, maybe when you spew so much hatred, maybe it's because you have hatred in your heart and you need to heal and get that out. A lot of people would just dismiss people like that and be like, they're gone, too far gone. But who knows what kind of insecurities, issues people are dealing with. So this goes to Canada. So when Martin Luther King was speaking against the Vietnam War, he said, how can we send people over there to hurt the Vietnamese? And we're worried about the Vietnamese because what they were saying is they're being taken over by communists, they're being oppressed by the Viet Cong. We need to go liberate them. When here in America, our own people are being oppressed. So, Mr. Curdo, what's his name? Your president? Your prime
Oh,
minister?
Trudeau.
Trudeau. So, Mr. Trudeau is famous for inviting refugees to come and stay with the Canadians and to make room for all the oppressed of the world. And for what I hear, he doesn't care about the oppressed people who are there. So that breaks my heart, and it just shows that we haven't learned anything. I'll leave it at that. So thank you so much. Thank you for it's a very painful conversation, but one that needs to be had, and um, hopefully people will hear what we have to say and come with us in this journey. So thank you again for participating.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this and I enjoyed the invitation too. I'm very happy to be part of this conversation.
Same here. I'm even happier that the tech issues didn't shut it down early on.
So thank you. Love you guys. Thanks so much for doing this. And hopefully it won't be another month. I know Angela is super busy, but hopefully we can do this in a couple of weeks.
Whenever I'm open. I'm so grateful to be having these conversations, and thank you so much for facilitating tonight,
So
for instigating this whole thing.